Hello. I think I'm live, but Facebook is confusing. Hello, Rise Up Visionaries. I'm Susan May, and I'm here to share my random ramblings and anything that goes through my brain to inspire you to tune into your intuition so you can begin your journey of unplugging. So today I want to talk about my oldest daughter's journey into learning to read. And a couple days ago, or was it yesterday? No, I think 2 days ago, I did a live about unschooling and just some random ramblings on my thoughts of unschooling and why my family loves it, how I learned about it. And reading is one of the big topics that comes up when people are discovering unschooling and just want to know how does that work. So first thing I want to say is that I have Marisol's permission to share this story, and in fact this morning we sat down for a long time, probably an hour or more, and discussed what I should share, what were major milestones in her journey of learning to read. So yes, I have her permission. I need permission these days to share anything for my big kids. You may have noticed I share a lot more pictures of myself and some of Carter, and not so many of my big kids anymore because they don't want me doing that, and I respect that wish. So the first thing I really want to emphasize is that in the past year or so, about 18 months, Marisol has repeatedly thanked me for not forcing her to read when she was younger. And the reason this came up is that she watched a YouTube video where a girl talked about how she used to love reading and then she was forced to read all the time and now she hates it. She doesn't like reading at all. And this girl actually even said after that she hates reading, but she still thinks that her parents did the right thing, because she thinks that's how we all think, right? Like, well, our parents do things for our own good, and because of that, it was the right thing to do. So Marisol has thanked me multiple times. I can't even count how many times, for not forcing her to read because she loves to read. In fact, this is a book she read this past summer, which is over 400 pages long, and it was a book she had not read before. It was a gift from one of her friends for her birthday, and she really wanted to read this book, so that was amazing. So I really think that's an important point to make, because I think we all want our children to love learning. We want them to love reading, and when we force someone to do something, that takes away the love of learning. Some other key points. I want to hit some really key points for people that maybe won't stay around for a longer session of Susan talking, because this is a long story. So I'm going to hit the most important points and then go into the actual specifics of her learning to read. So first of all, Marisol is an auditory learner, which was apparent from the time she was like a toddler and I was reading books to her. She loved me reading aloud to her. Also, because of that, audiobooks have been a crucial part of her both learning to love stories and learning to love books and learning to read. And there's another YouTube video that she shared with me, and I will put the YouTube links below so you can watch them, of these YouTubes that she told me about. She saw a video about how there's studies showing that listening to audiobooks actually has the same benefits as reading books. And so a lot of people have kind of a bias that like reading a physical book is somehow better than listening. But if you actually look what's going on in the brain, it's the same. So it's curious to think about. It's just a question to ask yourself, why do I think one thing is better than the other? Like, what makes me think that? So that is, I'm just trying to see here. Okay. I can see that some people are on. I keep getting a couple messages from Facebook that it says my current frame rate is too low, which it said last time too, and I have no idea what that means. So hopefully you guys can all see this. I am still new to all this live stuff, so I can't see like who's watching right now or if there's any comments. So I'm just gonna keep going and hope that you can hear this. Okay, so that's one. Marisol's an auditory learner. Second main point is that this her journey to learning to read looked way different than I expected it to. And I'm going to dive deeper into that. It was a much longer process than I expected it to be. Graphic novels, she wanted me to tell you, were a huge part of her learning to read. And finding book series that she loved. So she loved Harry Potter, she loved the Percy Jackson series, Wings of Fire, Lunar Chronicles, and most recently The Hunger Games. If she was in school, we are like probably 90% certain she may have been labeled or diagnosed as dyslexic. And I had suspicions of that for a long time and just didn't tell her because I didn't want her to feel anxious about that or worried. But the older she's gotten and she's described things to me about how her brain works, how she sees words on the page, and how long it took her and how it was a difficult process for her, I am really quite certain that she may have been diagnosed dyslexic, or at the very least she would have been put into like remedial reading groups or things like that. But because she was not in school, she didn't have to go through that, and now she's reading, and she has retained that love of reading and also her sense of worth, her self-confidence. She reads with her brother at bedtime. So Jerry is 12 years old. So what 15-year-old and 12-year-old do you know that read together at bedtime? Is like one of the sweetest things I love about their relationship. So that's kind of like a quick overview of Marisol's reading, how it's come along. So now I'm going to kind of give you some detail about how it looked from the time she was 2 years old all the way up now till present. She's 15 years old. So when Marisol was 2 years old, I would read to her these long fairy tales. I had one of those books that it was like Grimm's fairy tales or something. And for a 2-year-old, these were very long stories. And she had a great attention span for them. And I could just read to her for half an hour or an hour at bedtime. And she loved it. When she was 3 years old, she used to say that one of her favorite things was books at bedtime. And yes, at 3 years old, she could say that. She could say, my favorite things, books at bedtime, which is funny to me because now we have a non-speaking child who's 5. So it's funny to me to think about all the things she could say at 3. So I thought she was going to be an early reader based on those things because she was very verbal, her vocabulary was amazing, and she loved me reading to her. At around age 4, she picked up a pencil and asked for paper and wrote her first words, which also to me was like a sign, like, okay, she's starting to want to spell words. One of her first memories of like recognizing words was watching TV, and she was looking for one of her favorite shows, Wow Wow Wubsy, on the guide. Like she had the guide up, and she saw the letter W and she recognized it. So she said, oh, that must be Wow Wow Wubsy. She was about 5 years old. So all this time, I'm just, I had been reading about unschooling since she was 18 months, so I wasn't worried. She's going to read when she reads. But it wasn't happening quite as early as I thought. When she was 6 or 7, she got sick. She had a fever, and a friend brought her one of those early reader books. It was from the Disney movie Brave. And I read it to her once, and then she said, I want to try. And she read it from the beginning to the end. Now, a lot of it was probably kind of memorized because I had just read it to her, but you could also see that she was taking her time and looking at each word and recognizing words. And I thought, this is it. This is the beginning of her really beginning to read. It's going to take off from here. Not really. That's not how it happened still. So she was, I think, like I said, 6 or 7 at that age. And she remembers in that book having a difficult time with the word the, T-H-E. She always switched the H and the T. So that was like an early sign of her brain just kind of processing things a little bit differently. And I really think she's a whole word reader. I don't think she's a phonics type reader. I think she says she will glance at a word and kind of guess. And then she has to look at it again. So she thinks she gets words wrong a lot on the first try. So when she was 8 years old, I finally convinced her to let me read Harry Potter to her, which I had been wanting to do for a while. Unfortunately, I had scared her with the movie when she was much younger. She saw Voldemort and was like, I'm not reading that. So at 8, I finally convinced her to let me start reading it, and she was hooked, and we read the entire series in a period of 2 or 3 months. And you know the Harry Potter series, and I was reading out loud. So I would read to her 3-4 hours a day while Jerry was off playing and watching videos and things like that. So that was awesome. Then we went to the Percy Jackson series. I read that to her out loud. And then she wanted to read the next Percy Jackson series, and that's when we got into audiobooks. I was like, I can't read this out loud anymore. So she says we got the CDs out from the library. When she was about 9 or 10, she read her first book that a friend had given her, like a chapter book type book. It's the first one she remembers. And she said at that point, it was still so difficult for her. It took so much brain power to just read the sentences, and she would have to reread. She felt she had almost zero comprehension. It took her a really long time, like months or a year, to read that book. And so it just still wasn't easy. It wasn't clicking. Even at 9 or 10 years old, even being immersed in books, even having her mother read to her for on hours, it was just really difficult. So when she was 11 or 12, one of her girlfriends was into graphic novels, and Marisol thought, I want to try that. So we went to the library and got a bunch of graphic novels, and she said that really helped her because there's less text on the page. They're broken into boxes, because that's one thing that has been difficult for her, is just the big page of text. And she did learn other strategies too, like she would take a bookmark, and hold it and read it line by line. So she has learned strategies to help, and she figured these things out on her own. So the graphic novels helped her so much because the images also gave her context. So that's when she's like about 11 or 12 years old. What else? Yeah, the audiobooks were huge. When she was 13 years old, before we moved to Florida, no, we weren't moving to Florida yet. We were just visiting my parents. We put the Libby app on her phone, which meant she could get audiobooks out from the library. And in the 2 years or 2.5 years since then, she has listened to 180 audiobooks. She loves audiobooks. She can listen to them for hours on end. She has an amazing attention span. She likes to do other things when she listens to audiobooks. So that was pretty amazing. Another thing that we did is that I started reading Harry Potter again to Jerry at nighttime, and Marisol was in the room too, so we were all reading them together. And it got to a point where we were reading so very little, like a page or two a day. It was like, moving through mud. We were going so slow. And eventually, Marisol took over, and she finished the 6th Harry Potter book, the 7th book with Jerry, and now they are almost done with the Percy Jackson series, and they read together every single night, and they often take turns. Like she will read and then he will read, which is just amazing and wonderful. So another breakthrough this year was she, with the Hunger Games, she finally wanted to read those books. So the first thing she did was listen to the audiobooks. Then we watched the movies, and then she read the entire series this year. So she has had a lot of breakthroughs this year as a 15-year-old, and she's just it's getting easier for her all the time. She also has this huge history book that she will read a page or two. She loves maps, and it's this huge history book. So my main point is, one, she would have been diagnosed in a school setting, and she probably would hate reading. Instead, she now loves reading. I told you she read this book. She has like so many other books. She still loves audiobooks, but she wants to push herself to read more. When she was about 11 years old, a really good friend, family friend who knew me and knew about unschooling, made a pretty harsh comment to me about, well, she does want to go to college, right? And I believe we were talking about another friend's child who was struggling at school, who was not happy. And it really hurt me a lot because it showed that he really didn't understand. And, people will be judgmental if you choose not to do lessons and if they think that your kid isn't where they should be at a certain point in time. And there were times when I wondered, oh my gosh, should I be doing more for her? If I suspect she is dyslexic, like what can they do for her? And I would check in with her. I would say, Marisol, do you think you want something more? Do you want a tutor? Or do you think, what do you think? And she always was okay with it. And recently, she now knows that I suspected for a long time she was dyslexic. She has told me how she will pick words from one line and put them up into another, into the line that she's reading. So her brain does all sorts of interesting things that I never experienced. I mean, reading has always been easy for me. And so we've had great conversations about the difference between an auditory learner and a visual learner. And most of us, we do really well when we have the two combined. So I think that was the biggest thing that helped her, was the fact that we really supported that auditory strength of hers. And with time, everything else is just coming in. And so now she's reading really well. Is it as easy as it is for other people? Maybe not. But I really feel confident that as she just continues reading more and more and more, it's just going to continue to become more easy. And the thing is like, we all learn in so many different ways. Like, look, you're watching this video. I mean, so much now is available in so many different ways. I really don't think it's a huge limitation. So that is Marisol's reading journey. For me, the biggest thing, besides her thanking me for not forcing her, and I think this can be applied to a lot of current events we're seeing going on in the world, right? The issue of force. When people are forced to do things, it doesn't work. It creates a lot of tension. It creates resistance. It makes people not like the person forcing them, which is not good for relationships. So I really think it's interesting, especially in freedom circles, to see parenting practices that go against people's ideals. They don't want the government doing things, and yet they do things to their children because they think it's for their own good, which always makes me a little curious. But I like to point things out just very gently, because we are all on our own paths, and I know that parents love their children. That there is no question of, and the fact that we are all trying to do the best we can. So for me, what's really amazing is that Marisol's confidence and her love of learning are still intact, and that she knows how very much we love her, and that we see her for the amazing, intelligent human being that she is. Which I truly believe we are all born that way. We are all born with our own unique intelligence and genius. And tomorrow, when I talk about Jerry, you're going to see how different his story is, which is amazing, right? That two kids from the same family, with the same parents, in the same environment, can just have completely different stories about learning to read. And yet here we are, we have two very good readers that both love books, that love learning. And so that is the beauty of this story. I would love to hear your stories about if you remember yourself learning to read, which I really don't remember learning to read. I will tell you what I do remember. I remember in first grade being asked to tell the difference between the letters B and D, small b and small d. And I got it wrong, and I cried. Remember my sensitive soul video? I cried and cried. I did not know little b and little d. It was so devastating. So again, a little traumatic story from school that I remember, first grade, 6 years old, and I still remember. I didn't know little b and little d, and guess what? I know little b and little d now. So I'm really grateful for all of you here watching. I would love to hear your stories of your children learning to read, or if you have more questions or just want more encouragement as you try to guide them on their journey. I really love unschooling. It is one of my huge passions. I think it's so good for children and so good for families, and I really think it's the way of the future. So you want to be on the cutting edge, right? Thank you for watching. Please like my Rise Up with Susan May page, subscribe on YouTube, and more importantly, share anything that inspires you so the good energy and love begins to spread like wildfire. And remember, be bold, be brave, be you.